Okay, everyone. This is not what I originally intended to make today, but I actually saw the new Fantastic Four movie, and I thought it was just awful. And a lot of people were kind of wondering, well, why exactly do you think it was bad? I mean, a lot of other people in theater um, thought it was decent, but not like the big Marvel, saving grace movie um, that everyone thought it was going to be. So I'm just going to dissect it little by little, and there will be some spoilers for certain parts of the movie, but not enough to basically derail the entire story. So first, let's a few things that they got pretty well was actually the appearance of Galactus, rather than looking like just a giant human in a costume, with an awkward mask like he's normally portrayed. It looked like he was one solid ancient mask, like a golem, possibly from his you know, it said eons of just feeding on planets, and the voice was actually pretty terrifying as well. In this case, I forget exactly who voiced him, but it definitely did sound like it was a very commanding presence. And if someone was talking to you like that, you would definitely be very frightening. Um, Another thing I think they did was kind of nice to actually see was how the thing didn't was able to kind of blend in with the rest of society. I mean, he wasn't too big, like other depictions, and it seems though like he was actually having fun with kids, like you actually saw in the trailer. But he didn't actually have like that very gravelly voice, like with the Michael Chiklis version or the one from the Josh Trank film, where it sounds like it's a totally different person, just because of how the rocks took over every tissue. It says, and that's pretty much the only thing. That's the only really good things that I could actually pick out of it. So there are definitely some very bad parts, and I kind of would, let's just go by individual characters. So starting with Mr. Fantastic, Pedro Pascal was just terrible. He didn't have the nerdy look of like Owen Grufford or Miles Teller. Um, he just looked way too old, and just that awkward, the way he was dressed and the mustache made me think of a child predator, to be honest. And you know, so while in this case he was kind of, worried about regular forms of life, he didn't seem like the kind of person that if you told an awkward joke to, know, he wouldn't get it. It just looked like, for me, he just looked like you just didn't belong. Like maybe if you showed like a future version of him, they could say it probably would have worked, but for a much basically we're talking about there's only been like 4 years since they became the Fantastic Four, and they just made it look like he was way too old. Like he took the long way through academia, not someone who excelled, and said through various grades to get into some kind of fancy institute to test his own merit. And they didn't even try to make him look old, said younger in flashbacks. It was like, what was even the point? It's like how some people are typecasted, said against certain things. I said I still see him more as the Mandalorian too much. I didn't see him as a scientist or anything else like that. He didn't really even seem to be that happy to be there. So another serious problem is that he really wasn't all that stretchy. I mean, there was a few moments where he was able to kind of stretch around, but it really didn't look anything that significant, um, like he's known for in the comic books. I mean, in this case, it looked like he could maybe stretch three, maybe four times his body length when he has like his hands and arms fully outstretched, but that's it. And at one point, it said, and that's just pathetic. I mean, even the Miles Teller version looked like he could actually stretch, quite a bit. Although he did have to use those springs to keep him, back into his original form. Said, learn to control him like a man. But when they show like in the Rise of the Silver Surfer, that version of Mr. Incredible so Mr. Fantastic was actually able to hold up the London Ferris wheel by stretching himself insanely far. And it didn't really sound like he was totally, exhausted by the experience. It just seems like, even just stretching, his arms out of, you know, by a good distance, to like write something on the chalkboard wasn't, such a big deal. But the Pedro Pascal version, not that impressive to be honest. So moving on to Sue Storm, I just did not. It said she was pretty enough, but she sounded like she wasn't. She was also not very happy to be here, and it's almost like she has to be the mom for every single person around her, and she's kind of fed up with it. I mean, she had a few moments where she smiled nicely, but it seemed kind of forced, to be honest. Um, and I just didn't like, and I just did not like, her voice on the thing. It always kind of seemed like she didn't want to be there, or anything. She didn't really sound motherly, it said at all. So, and and then again, there's the whole point where she had to give birth in space. I'm like, why would you even go up there, when you're that close to the due date? I mean, I don't care how advanced, space travel actually is. You're talking about, going all the way up there, possibly even traveling, you know, across, the universe just to see where Galactus actually is. And yet, you know, you thought, okay, it said Turkey's almost done, but I'll be fine. And it honestly seemed like there was a moment they were trying to blast off. I'm thinking, yeah, they're not going to blast off. She's immediately going to go into labor, and it's like, well, that's going to be a letdown. And yeah, I mean, she did have a few good moments with her powers, but it's almost like they put the focus too much on her rather than anyone else. So it was just like, why? I mean, you didn't really don't have any major favorite versions, live action versions of the Invisible Woman. I mean, Kate Mara was a little awkward, so was Jessica Alba, but this one was just like, yeah. So if you talk about Johnny, he wasn't quite as the young, immature person that everyone knows and loves him as. I mean, I know that if different realities could have it, but you kind of wanted him to be a person that would be saying, okay, yeah, I just woke up, it's Saturday morning, time for cartoons, or doing something very childish, on his own. Instead, that kind of gets on everyone's nerves, but he's a little too mature, in my opinion. He just, didn't really have that, hot-headed nature that, like he was totally trying to get on Ben's nerves. I mean, they did have a few bits of banter, but not like what Chris Evans and Michael Chiklis had. It just seems like they just made them a little too different, from the comic books, and it just didn't really seem like um, they wanted because there's even a moment where he actually discovers something very important. And for me, I really don't know too many incarnations where he's actually labeled as the overly smart one. I mean, maybe with like engines and building things, he could definitely do that by following the instructions, but being on the same level as, his sister in terms of intellect, it just doesn't always work. And because for me, as I said, Johnny Storm is always supposed to be the kind of like the voice of reason, where in this case it's like you said, you guys are a little too intellectual about this particular issue. This is how I see it, and somehow it works. It like he came up with it right then and right there. You know, instead of relying upon, like say counting for various variables. Um, you know, but it wasn't actually a bad thing for him to be there, and they did show him actually being able to put out fires by just seeming to be like absorbing it. I mean, there are some versions where you can kind of divert it, but it's they didn't never really showed him almost like basically sucking away the flames, regardless of whatever caused them. So yeah. So in terms of maybe someone like that as a thing, um, for me, I do like it when the character himself is a lot bigger, almost as though he's maybe say close like the Hulk size, maybe a slightly smaller. So you definitely know the fact that he's still definitely very powerful because he can throw around a lot more weight. And while this version was actually able to lift a couple heavy things, it didn't really seem like he was particular. Maybe his upper limits weren't that high, like not even lifting 100 tons. And the Michael Chiklis version was able to lift the London Ferris wheel, so it could be repaired. And yet, while in this case he did kind of struggle in the beginning, he was still powers were still fresh and manifesting. Would think after like so many years, this character would have been able to just grab something, pretty heavy like an armored car with just one arm instead of one arm, one hand, tie behind his back, and all of a sudden just chuck it like it was nothing. But this one actually did sound like it was a bit of an ordeal to even use. So yeah. Yeah. I mean, he still kind of had a few moments where he definitely was like very compassionate, but he didn't actually have that rough nature between him and Johnny, and maybe there wasn't. They did give him a love interest, but it was kind of forced, and it barely even happened. So I'm thinking it's like, what was even the point? So, so in this case, the female Silver Surfer, it just she didn't really seem as menacing as the Lawrence Fishburne, Norrin Rad version with that deeper voice. I mean, the whole when he says like, "All you know is at an end," you know, that definitely sounded. I mean, other than maybe a slight metallic, sound to her voice, the Silver Surfer really wasn't much. Didn't really sound all that threatening, and even then, she didn't really do too many awkward things other than chase people and maybe destroy the big MacGuffins at the end, which you could say was definitely another stupid idea. And just in part of the whole thing, just because like as I said, because it seems like Galactus, takes a while to go from planet to planet, and yet, they're thinking, okay, we'll have this thing up and ready, and yet, you literally see the Silver Surfer, destroying, special certain things related to the movie, um, with every, instead within a matter of seconds in between, and other than that, there really wasn't too much. I mean, there was a bit of a space fight, but that was over and done with way too quickly, and she wasn't really showing like distorting reality as much other than passing through solid objects. It's like, what exactly are you supposed to do? I mean, not really much. And said there, while there is a touching backstory, pretty much, I'll work for Galactus to spare my planet. It just seemed as though that she was a slave to her emotions once certain truths hit her. So the character was introduced in this one was actually Franklin Richards, the son of Reed and Sue, and it just was a little too rushed because he didn't really look like they said once they got back to Earth, he didn't look like he was only just out. It said just born, like not even a week ago. This one seemed a bit more responsive. It said he's like slightly smiling, and that takes weeks to actually it said to actually occur. But but the kid looked a little too big, for for just a total newborn. And while it was important enough for the story, he knew eventually was going to like demonstrate his power. Instead, demonstrate some kind of power. It's like hurry up and get it over with. And essentially, the situation that required it was proof that everyone else was not nearly as impressive. So it's like, yeah, look at me, I'm amazing. But it's like, yeah, but it said that just mean it said maybe you're not as amazing right now because you're still a baby, but we can honestly say that everyone else just sucked hardcore. And, you know, so in this case, only real flaws I would say with like Galactus was maybe he didn't try, he said maybe he wasn't as, um, like maybe he wasn't Uh, let's see. Like I at least would just say is that um, he was a little more upfront and cordial. At least when the Fantastic Four met them, rather than just it said outright threats. And even when he went to Earth, he was only about his mission. Like he wasn't, showing being more curious about the planet he was about to consume. Like almost as though like taunting him, saying, "This almost makes me sad to to devour this thing." So yeah, and but that's pretty much all I have with that one. Um, but then again, there's a lot of other things like they would show how everything was a bit more advanced. Like there was like certain types of cars that didn't look like they belonged. Elevated trains that I don't think were quite in production back in the 60s, because that's kind of what they were supposed to be referencing. It just either made it either seem as though that either some as I Reed either built it, or this was just a slightly more advanced kind of world, as a whole. Like they didn't really explain it. Like yeah, this is all the stuff that Reed built, because they actually kind of had like a type of smartwatch. And while in this case played things like Dick Tracy, would set in a much earlier said earlier time, had something very similar. It's like you still want to know when exactly did this come into play. So, but something I was actually truly just disappointed and disgusted at was that when there was no real mention of Doctor Doom, you know, throughout the entire movie. The closest thing was that they, did some where basically we're talking about in a quest, kind of like quest for peace kind of issue. Um, the chairs for Latveria were not, occupied. Like someone didn't agree, and then if you were kind of waiting for like a mid credit or even a very end credit thing, you do technically see Doctor Doom, but there's no major interaction. You just kind of see him behind, and he's just kind of interacting with Franklin. It's not there's no wanting to see what Robert Downey Jr. was even supposed to even be involved with this, because you honestly would have expected if he was in this particular um, in this world, and then everything really bad was happening. This might be one of those temporary truces where it's like, we got to figure this out so that way I can. He said, I don't want Galactus to to devour this world, because it said until after I, conquered it for myself. And yeah, it just some of the parts were just a little were just so kind of slow. It's like get on with it. And even like the big fight scene at the end just seemed to be over way too quickly, without much of a chance to actually show everything off. It's just like, how exactly were they supposed to even defeat everything? It said it just doesn't make much sense. I mean, the whole movie was a nice, casual watch for anyone who does not actually know the characters. But if you've been kind of preparing for this particular viewing experience, you're not gonna like it. So I said, I said if you do want to see it, that's fine, but just kind of take everything with a lot of with several grains of salt. You know, I said, because it's gonna be a bit of it can definitely be. It's not everyone's cup of tea. So take care.